All right, everybody, we are going to get going. Sorry for the slight delay in getting started. We just wanted to give everyone time to, who's in here in person, to get in and get seated. It's nice to see a number of you joining us via webinar too. We had sadly all too many people who couldn't join us today because either they had the flu or their loved ones had the flu or their staff had the flu. So I'm sorry for everyone who's in that condition. We appreciate you all taking time out of your Friday to join us to talk about the legislative session and specifically how it's affecting non-public schools. We have Caitlin Bell with us, who's IQE's Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs. A lot of you have probably worked with her in the past, so you know the good work that she does. We're joined by her relatively new colleague, Luke McNamee, who is also part of her team. We will let all of you who are in the room representing non-public schools introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to open up the line after that and let those of you who are on the webinar, if you care to introduce yourself. If you can, everyone please speak up just to make sure that everyone on the computer can hear you. So with that, go for it.
Great. I'm Kateri Whitley. I'm the Marketing Director for Providence Cristo Rey High School in Indianapolis.
Hi, I'm Candace Pate, Director of Admissions and Community Partnership with Providence Cristo Rey High School.
Good afternoon, I'm Latoya Black, School Director of Marian Academy in Indianapolis.
I'm Kenny Roll from Tabernacle Christian School. I'm the administrator there in Burnsville, Indiana.
Courtney Brooks, President at Cristo Rey High School in Indianapolis.
Jay Snyder, Vice President of Cristo Rey, Providence Cristo Rey, sorry.
Great. And I'm going to unmute you all online. If you care to, introduce yourselves, please do.
Indianapolis. This is Mary McCoy with the Archdiocese of Indianapolis.
So we have the Archdiocese joining us from Indy. That's great. Who went first? I didn't quite catch you.
Mary.
Okay.
Did you get Mary McCoy? Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, everyone else is being secretive, but we do have a few other people on the phone. We will let Caitlin go ahead.
Thank you all for joining us. I will try to be quick and painless and make this as much of a discussion as possible. We have just a few slides here to kind of walk you through what we're doing. The first one, I think you have a handout of. It's just the legislative process. We get questions on this. I'm sure many of you already are more aware of this, but sometimes it's a helpful reminder for parents or anyone who may be interested in a bill that's impacting their school. So this is just how the process works. This is a short session. The legislators will leave by March 14th. Sooner, if that would be fantastic, I'd be fine with that. Next session will be a long session. Every other year is a long session that ends at the end of April, and that's when we do with the budget. So, next slide. We have a deadline week approaching. So committee report deadlines, second reading, and third reading deadlines are all kind of coming up next week and then early the following week. This is essentially when all of the bills in one chamber, so all the House bills have kind of finished through the House and all the Senate bills have finished through the Senate. Then we have halftime and we switch the bills over and start all over. So, Marcy, I think you, it's in the way. It's in the way. No, okay. So there are about 1,000 bills filed this session, pretty evenly distributed, about 430 from the Senate and 450 from the House. And roughly 40 bills in each chamber went to the House or the Senate Education Committee. A lot of these bills will never see the light. The light of day that's always being filed. They're never going to move. You have a packet in front of you that is a bill tracking link. And this will have we flagged all these bills that we believe will impact non-public schools. Some of them only at this point in time apply to traditional publics or charters, but we've included a handful of those in here because as we've seen throughout the conversation, it's easy for people to say, well, I think non-public schools should be added to this. So we just wanted to make sure they were on your radar, even though not all of them currently apply to you as written. I mentioned the deadlines coming up, so next week will be busy, but anything that hasn't moved after those deadline dates, right? So if it hasn't passed the House by February 5th or passed the Senate by February 6th, it's dead, right? So those bills will disappear from this bill tracking sheet, and then we'll have a smaller universe to deal with. So the next slide is just this link. I believe Marcy has shared this with you before, and we're happy to share it again. This link
It might have been Mary. Baker
yeah,
who
sorry.
shared it. If not, we'll make sure to send it.
You have it, yes. So this link will always say, and you don't have to try to write that down. I tried to shorten it and make it like but it wouldn't work, that it wouldn't update. So we'll send it to you so y'all have it in your inbox and you can just click on it. It will update automatically. So if you click on this Monday after some of these bills have been voted on, it'll show those changes. So we will kind of run through some of those, but I'll probably touch on a few of the bigger topics first. But feel free to chime in with questions throughout. If there are any things in here that we don't bring up that you want to talk about specifically or things that you've heard, please don't be shy. This will probably be better if it's more of a discussion than me talking at you. So some of the big things this session from a non-education issue are the opioids issue, the opioids epidemic, and there are probably at least 20 different bills that have been filed that deal with this in some way, shape, or form. It's a governor agenda item to try to do something to address this, and also both the House and Senate leadership as well. So there will be a package of bills that kind of deal with this issue and how do we move forward, how do we help provide resources to those impacted. But that's a bigger picture, non-education, although I'm sure it impacts many of your students and families. But that's being talked about this session. Alcohol has sucked a lot of the energy out of the State House. If you're for Sunday sales, you're likely going to get that. So if you want to buy cold beer at a gas station, it's probably not going to happen this session. But I think everything on alcohol is pretty much, it's not finalized yet, but everyone is pretty much in agreement. So that seems to be the Indy Star's favorite topic to write about. So if that's your media source, that's probably all you've seen on legislative stuff lately. The other big issue that's talking about is part of the governor's agenda as well, but really the workforce and how do we balance the K-12 system, higher ed system, and workforce in between. Most of what's moving this session, there are a variety of bills that deal with a lot of different things. I think what we're going to end up with at the end of the day is a bunch of how do we study and structure this so that we can move into a budget year next year and know how to reprioritize money. A lot of this comes down to, from a workforce perspective, we get lots of money from the federal government that goes into different buckets, right? From Work One centers, some of it goes down into K-12 and CTE, most of it's from a higher ed perspective. But how do we take these various pots of money and better utilize them to make sure that we're making sure that Hoosiers have the skills they need for whatever next, whether that's a certificate program, whether that's higher ed, and how all that works together. We need to better streamline that. So that's the overarching goal. There are a lot of different ideas on how to accomplish that, and we'll probably can tell you a more specific thing on March 14th because they're probably going to take that long to figure out exactly what they want. But those are kind of some of the big overarching issues that are talked about. Tons of little issues on anything you could possibly imagine in those various 1,000 bills. But from an education perspective, there are kind of two bigger areas that we talked about. One was the funding fix, which has been fairly quiet. Impacted you all less than many of the public schools, but it did impact voucher students, right? So just you remember this fall, there was reporting that there were actually 6,000 more students in public school than what the General Assembly had estimated when they ran the last budget numbers. The reporting made it sound like a bigger issue than it really was. The state has had in place a fund, a tuition reserve fund, to make sure that, as we estimate, and it's hard to know how many students move in and out every year and where they're going to go, but as we estimate those numbers, there is a tuition reserve fund that says we can, we have some flexibility. So there were 6,000 more students than we expected. House Bill 1001 and Senate Bill 189 essentially are those avenues to fix the funding. That says the Budget Committee has the authority to take money we already had set aside in this tuition reserve pot to put it to the K-12 funding formula so DOE can continue to disperse that. I know there were emails going around, particularly for the voucher side of things, that you could have seen a reduction and the student award amount. All that should be taken care of. There should be, I think DOE has distributed to schools that they're not making any reductions beginning in January. They've gotten assurance from the General Assembly that this will move forward. So that issue it still needs to do with the formality of passing again the governor's signature, but it's all but taken care of. The other big issue kind of around K-12 that as we headed into session is the diploma issue, grad pathways, and kind of testing, and it's all combined. They're all separate, but they're all combined in ways. So there are two bills, one in the House and Senate, that kind of deal with these issues. It's House Bill 1426 in the House and Senate Bill 177 in the Senate. They look very different right now, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to have one bill, and both chambers are fairly close in agreement on what they want it to look like at this point. So some of the highlights, right? We all know that given the change from ESSA, that the USDOE says that general diplomas will no longer count in the graduation rate. There's been a lot of conversation around that. This Representative Banning's bill attempted to move our current diploma structure and say it kind of some, choices of wording changes in the statute that would make a difference to the feds. Say we have one diploma, we have an Indiana diploma, but there are various designations throughout. So you can still have the general diploma, the core 40, the honors, and the technical honors, but we'll consider it from a statutory purpose as one diploma. So the goal was to get the federal government to say, okay, this counts. We're not going to say these, small percentage of students getting the general diploma won't count. We haven't gotten any assurance from the federal government that they read that this way. There have been lots of emails and phone calls with USDOE, the governor's office, the Department of Ed, and House and Senate leadership. And we have fortunately been able to be a part of some of those. The USDOE has said maybe, maybe not. We're not quite sure yet. We don't know how to tell you. They're still not sure if they're going to address the IDOE's waiver that they submitted. So there's this looming question out there. I think one thing to help clarify that we've been talking with legislators is it will only impact the federal graduation rate that's reported. So currently the A through F grades, the data that goes into that, all include the general diploma and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. The current A through F rules that are being discussed at the state board, the proposed rules, allow for a phase out of that. So we think within like 3 or 4 years, for the next 3 or 4 years at least, a statewide A through F will include the general diploma. So it's really from a federal reporting standpoint where that issue comes into play. So any questions on like that piece of it before I dive into the rest of that bill?
I was going to ask,
Yeah.
what would be the benefit of switching to just one diploma versus leaving it as a...
The only benefit, they were just hoping to change like the way that it's worded in statute to get the feds to say that, okay, the way, because it's under ESSA, it's the preponderance of your students have to, are receiving the diploma. If it's below that, they don't count. So they're saying any student who gets a general diploma doesn't count as a graduate for the graduation rate. And so they thought instead of having 4 separate diplomas, if we just said it's one diploma, but there are different designations, the feds would say, okay, they're all earning an Indiana diploma, it won't count. So it's, in practice, it doesn't change anything from what you all deal with, right, on a day-to-day basis. It's more of just how the feds look at it, right? Now that being said, another piece in this bill is, so from the data we've heard and the anecdotal stories we've heard from school leaders across the state is that 70% of students who receive the general diploma typically fall into that category of we had trouble getting the Algebra 2 requirement, and there are about 30% statewide that have an IEP and severe cognitive disabilities. So Representative Banning's bill also requires the State Board of Ed to take a look at their Core 40 requirements for both math and science and see if there's some flexibility and alternative either math or science courses that could take the place of that Algebra 2 requirement. So not just saying that any math course would fit, but are there other courses that would be equivalent to Algebra 2 or just as helpful for a student earning a Core 40 to have that? So that will provide some additional flexibility to where, moving forward, the majority of students would probably not have any problem earning the general diploma, or the Core 40, I'm sorry. So the base of 1426 says the Core 40 is still kind of our base diploma, our default diploma. You can opt out of that into the general diploma or opt up to the higher honors. Senate Bill 177, as drafted, says the base diploma will be the general diploma. That language is going to change. That bill is going to be heard next week. They've already committed that they're going to change that language. House, Senate, Governor, all the leadership is on board with, nearly 80 or 88%, I think, of our students receive the Core 40 or above, and they fear that moving that, and I agree with them, if we move that to a lower bar, we'll have fewer students who are achieving. So I think everyone seems to be in agreement that we don't want to drop down to the general diploma. And if we have some added flexibility in some of these math courses, it may help take care of some of the problem. So that's kind of from the diploma and Core 40 standpoint in that bill. 1426 also addresses the high school assessment. So this goes into all the graduation pathways conversation that has happened last session and over the summer and fall. But essentially says the department, when they're doing an RFP for the new assessment, that we're doing away with ECAs moving forward, and we'll use a college and career readiness, or a college entrance exam as our high school assessment. So the RFP, or the DOE will issue an RFP, will likely either be ACT or SAT, right? We don't name anyone in the bill, but it will have to be one test, and not, if we want to do SAT and you do ACT, that's fine. But the feds require us to have one base test that we're measuring off of. It will also require the state board and CHE to look at with the national. It's not a national credit score, but essentially we have college, score action SAT, right, to get into certain colleges, and every college has a different level. There will be a baseline set for what does it mean to be, you pass the high school version of this. So it'll be a separate threshold, but it will be set through CHE. So I think the trick with that will just be messaging to parents and students that just because you pass this version in high school may not necessarily mean you're eligible to get into Purdue, right? That there are different cut scores. So it'll be a messaging thing under that. But it will get rid of the ECA. It will get rid of the that continual remediation cycle of you didn't pass, but I need you to have this so you can graduate. It will be, here's your score, and it's what's going to count for accountability, but you don't necessarily have to hit this mark in order to get your graduation, assuming you meet other graduation requirements. Questions on that?
I guess my question is, because I get a lot of questions from both students and parents, we know that these scales are going away. We know that they're going to be replaced. And I'm still unclear, even though I heard you know exactly what is being replaced with. Because if it's being replaced with something that mirrors the ACT or the SAT, then we need to really communicate to parents, and the representatives really need to understand this as well, that it's not necessarily us saying that we want them to go to college, because every child is not, and I'm not an advocate of every child going to college, because college isn't for every child. So they need to really understand that, and I'm more than happy to send a message, but we need to really word it that way, because it's going to discourage a lot of kids, especially those who already struggle. And I struggle with that with talking to my parents who are SPED, because unfortunately children will say things, messages will get out, things are just misunderstood. So for example, I have a young lady who has an IEP, but she believes that she's going to just get a waiver because she's coming to school every day. And that's not
right.
The criteria for it.
Right.
And so other students who don't qualify as SPED think, oh, I'm coming to school every day, I don't have to take that test, I'll just get that waiver too. So information will get, misunderstood. But I'm just really curious, and I'm growing more impatient by the day, not with you, but just with them not giving us a straight answer on when the ECA is going to finally go away, because there's no clear answer on that at all. So I have that.
Yes.
And what specifically will the test be?
Yes. And a lot of that, it's going to be unclear until the DOE goes through the RFP process and gets the feedback from the various vendors of so they'll set up, here's what factors that we'd like to see in an assessment, and then the vendors come back and say, here's what we can provide, and they figure out the money. And so once we have that, we can move forward. I totally understand how frustrating it is to not know. So the other another piece of this bill, right? So we had the whole graduation pathway conversation. There are, different pathways that all is, not required until, freshman class 2023, right?
Graduate class, so it'd be
Right.
2019 graduate.
Yes. So, but there's language that Representative Bating amended into 1426 that says, if you have students that are currently, maybe they're in this, the remediation ECA cycle right now, but if they currently meet another requirement, or if they could graduate through a pathway, that we can go ahead and allow that moving forward to start earlier. It's not mandatory that you do that right now, but for some schools that will give them additional flexibility to get more students out with something meaningful instead of just the constant churn of trying to pass an ECA. I wish I had more clear information for you on specific timelines.
I have 2 students right now who taking the ECAs, probably a good, well, I don't know the amount of times, but every year and every window for the past 5 years, and they have all of the credits.
Yeah.
And this is the only thing holding it back, so.
Well, hopefully, if this language passes, and it still has to go through the House and Senate and all that, but the goal is to make sure that, if they can hit another option within that pathway language, that they would be able to move forward and graduate without a waiver through that. So, but that's good to know. It's always good to know those anecdotes so we can tell Representative Bating that you have students that fit in that category. So I think that's those are the highlights of that diploma bill. Again, 177 is the Senate version of it. They're going to hear it next week. I think they're going to take much of the language from 1426 and put that in there. I think the biggest thing that would be different is Representative Bating's bill also has some language that would create a fund for graduation pathways, so that if groups of schools want to get together and determine, hey, we want to create our own local pathway, and we want the state board to kind of come in and deem that it is rigorous and approved, and then it can be used statewide. He would like to set up a fund that says, schools can receive X amount of money to develop this. But then if you take the money, then it would require a third party evaluator that the state board hires to kind of verify it and then make sure that it's available to all schools to use. It's not eliminating the ability for a school to come to the state board and say, here's what we're doing at Providence Cristo Rey, and we think it's really unique and should qualify. They can still do that and approve that. You just want to be eligible for the grant funding. There's a big question mark around the grant funding anyway because it's a non-budget year, so that whole language section could be coming out anyway, but there is some language floating around about that. We'll see where it ends up. The other bigger topic is just the workforce stuff. I alluded to it in kind of the opening comments, but there's House Bill 1002 and Senate Bill 50 are the big major workforce bills moving. There are a number of smaller ones. I think at the end of the day, everything's going to be in one of those two. It's going to pretty much end up in a lot of summer study and various groups and councils trying to figure out how we fix this next year in the budget year. So if anyone has great ideas on how to fix that, we'd be happy to pass those along. From a kind of non-pub specific, I wanted to bring up just a few issues to make you all aware of. First of all, there were a handful of tax credit bills filed. Many of them dealt with kind of mirroring the SGO system and giving a tax credit, kind of creating a tax credit for people who donate to a public school foundation. The Senate gave these bills a hearing. He's not moving any of them. This will be a budget year conversation. But there are definitely, raises concerns that we have just on what could this mean for the SGO program moving forward? Are they going to try to take one cap? Will we be fighting for cap space? But also these bills have, the SGO is very specific it's used for student scholarships. There's a whole lot of questions on, a lot of flexibility on what it can be used for in the public sector space. So it's just something to keep an eye on, know that it's talking about. As these bills are being heard, some of our typical friends who hate on private school choice every chance they get took the opportunity to call out how terrible tax credits were and claim that we were breaking the law. So we have corrected the record and made sure they know that. But I just wanted to make you aware that those conversations are going on. And will definitely be an issue next session when we deal with the budget. The other thing on the tax credit is there was a bill filed just dealing with the 529 plan. And given everything that's happened with the federal tax bill, right, that now says that you can use a 529 for K-12 expenses has thrown a lot of states into what does this mean? You know, our state offers incentives. How do you, you know, if it's a savings account essentially that we put in place, how do we earn money if parents are now able to take that money out for kindergarten instead of being in there to save throughout? So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. So there is a bill, House Bill 1039, that was turned into just essentially a summer study committee that the fiscal bodies need to figure out what are the implications of the changes in the federal tax bill. How does that impact our 529? You know, will students, parents moving forward, you know, be able to use money from their 529 for private school tuition based on the federal changes? So it's a lot of questions. I've been on calls with some national folks. And really every state is handling this different, trying to figure out it happened so quick that nobody was ready for it. So every state is handling it different, but there are a lot of questions that come on that. If you guys are getting questions from parents on, hey, can we use our 529 money for tuition? We'll be happy to try to help however we can, connect them with the state's 529 folks, but let us know if you get questions on that. We're still trying to work through it. Another bill is the freeway accreditation bill. I'm not sure off the top of my head the freeway or the accreditation status of the schools in the room or on the call. I do know the folks from the Archdiocese were there to testify, but essentially the freeway statute hasn't been updated in like 20 plus years. It started out as we want to be able to give public schools flexibility, and really turned out to private schools mostly who are utilizing this accreditation. It has in it, current like performance metrics that schools have to meet in order to stay on, and based on how our system has changed, our standards, our testing has changed, very few of the schools are meeting the performance metrics set out in statute, yet many of the schools are A-rated. And so there's a question of, well, it seems kind of silly that, this is the metric that we're being measured on. So we're trying to work through that. Senator Cruz has a bill, and honestly, his goal is he doesn't want any private school to have state accreditation. In his mind, they shouldn't want to be connected to the state. They should want to seek national accreditation. We have talked with him and talked about, from a parent perspective, sometimes it's helpful to be able to say, we're state accredited just like our neighboring public schools. There are various reasons for that, cost, timeline. So essentially what the bill does is say we're giving it a 3-year waiver. Any school who has freeway accreditation can get a 3-year waiver from the state board, so they won't lose their accreditation during this period. His point is that you can get advanced ed accreditation in 3 years, so that gives people a window to do that. That said, we do expect there to be more conversation on, this is just a short-term fix, but what's the long-term fix? We've had conversations with the department who recognize that this language is totally outdated and needs to be more flexible and brought up to the time. So if anyone is specifically interested, concerned about accreditation, I know we work a lot with John Elsesser and the folks at the Archdiocese. Again, we're there to testify as well, but this is an issue we're working on closely in the House to make sure that it's an avenue for schools who need it and who want it, and that it's a reasonable one. So let us know if there's anything that we can be helpful on that issue or concerns that you may have. The last thing that I want to just Senate Bill 205, which is a bill that was heard Wednesday in committee, it essentially says that if a student who comes to your school on a voucher needs to leave mid-year, the voucher could follow them to another private school that they go to. It's all about money following the child. I think this is a great conversation as we lead into a budget year. We want away from that having two count dates that impact all public schools, and we got rid of the second voucher application window. I know most of your students don't come to you in the middle of the year. You prefer them to be their beginning, but we want to make sure that for those families that for whatever reason have to move, whether they're moving into the state or new job, whatever, that they have that flexibility and the financial support that they need. So I would be surprised if this bill gets a hearing and appropriations. It passed out of the Senate Education Committee unanimously, to our surprise. But it needs to be heard in the Appropriations Committee. My guess is that the chairman is going to tell us we'll deal with this in a budget year and not kind of in the middle of the year. But it definitely has been a helpful conversation to remind folks what a voucher is, that it's assistance for a family and not funding private schools, and that kind of the money follows the child conversation, which is helpful in the non-pub world as well as the charter world. So those are kind of the big headlines from the private school perspective. I'm happy to run through this whole list and go through some other bills and issues that may impact you, but I'll kind of open it up for questions now if there are any specific bills you've heard about or things that I mentioned that you want to ask more questions about, or I don't know if we have any online questions yet, Mars.
So far, nothing, but this would be a good time to toss a question in the ring if you're joining from the webinar.
So there are a handful of bills. I can't remember if I mentioned DREG already. That there are always dozens and dozens of bills filed every year that want to make schools do more, right? Require you to do more things, from you need to teach cursive writing to you have to file this report and we want to know this information. Layer onto all tip schools, and we try very hard to work with legislators and remind them that we keep asking schools to do more and more. We're going to have to require them to be open for 200 days of the school year, not 180, and give them more funding to do so. So a couple of those issues, right? Senate Bill 8, the cursive writing bill, passed the Senate again this year. We expect it to once again die in the House, but that keeps coming back. Senate Bill 172, which is actually a governor agenda bill. It's the computer science bill. It requires beginning in, the 2021-2022 school year is when it would take effect. Requires each public school to offer a computer science course as a one-semester elective. Non-pubs are not in this bill at this time. Again, it's one of those things that it could be added in at any time, because legislators have a tendency to say, well, if we're making one school do it, we should make every single type of school do it. The bill does also provide some funding for teacher training on how to teach those courses. But that's another example of some additional requirements. This one is less school related, but I just wanted to make you aware of it so you can, for those of you who share a campus with a church, Senate Bill 295 is going to be heard next week. So I'll just read you the summary, right? This is not my area of expertise, but this may impact a number of you. So, permits a sex offender to enter school property if a religious institution or house of worship is located on the school property and the person enters the school property for the sole purpose of attending worship services or receiving religious instruction. So, separate from the school, but I know that may impact some of you, so I just wanted to flag that bill is getting hearing. I didn't mention this. I mentioned the DREG already, and we're always watching for those issues. Senate Bill 434 creates a summer study committee that will essentially look at all of Title 20, right? So Senator Spartz, who is the new senator from Noblesville, she took Senator Kinley's place when he retired this fall. I've heard her say in her short time here at least 5 or 6 different times where she'll hold up here's Title 20 and all the laws and regulations we have for schools, and she's amazed by how big it is, right? And would love to just slash that in half. So this study committee is kind of getting us back to where we were with Senate Bill 500 a couple of years. So let's just take a look at everything that's in here and get rid of what we don't need anymore. What's not helping students? What's just extra regulation? We would love to get to a place for all schools where we can give you the freedom to teach, and if you're doing a great job and your students are succeeding, we'll stay out of your way. And if there are problems, then maybe we can look at where we need to step in. The state needs to step in, but so we're excited about even just that it's a study committee at this point, but just to talk about deregulation. Any specific ideas you guys have as you're going through your school day? Just keep a list of, hey, we do this report, and we have no idea why we do this report, or we're teaching this, and I don't know why we're teaching this, or just anything that at all that you'd love to take out of your workday that is not helping your students. Just keep a list of, because these are the types of things that they would love to be able to slash through the summer study committee. So that's kind of our ongoing focus on deregulation. Luke, am I missing anything big? Any specific questions you guys have, or things you want us to be doing that we're maybe not already bills doing it, or pardon?
Said I'm trying to take them all in.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. So as I mentioned, like we'll make sure you guys have this link, but it'll update all the time. There are hyperlinks on these, so like this just gives you the summary and kind of the latest action. But you'll be able to click on it. You'll be able to read the full bill. You can pull up the fiscal analysis statement, which will tell go through a little bit more in depth. You can see who voted for it or against it. So as you kind of play around with those links in the bill page, let us know if you have any questions on how does this work or not. But we're happy to help, hey, I'm not really sure how to read legislative language, right? Indiana code is something that for some people takes a little while to get used to. So let us know any questions you have. If something pops up that you think looks kind of fishy or is going to cause problems, or hey, we'd actually love for this to apply to us because it would be helpful, just keep us posted so we know how we can best be advocating on your behalf at the State House. And again, we work pretty closely with John Elsesser and IMPA, and also with Glenn Tebby of the Catholic Conference. So I'm trying to make it. Oh, you made it work.
I did.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything different than I did the last time, by the way.
So the next slide that you can't see right now has a link to our Action Center, which is fine. Don't screw it up. So, but it'll be on the webinar. We had a hard time getting this page to pull up in the last group. So I just wanted to make sure you guys knew, most of you have used it before, how our Action Center works. We try to make it really easy for people to communicate with legislators on bills that are important to you, or just to communicate with legislators in general. Hey, come visit our school if you haven't been out there. So this is kind of our homepage of our Action Center right now. It's a little blurry up there, but we have 2 active campaigns right now. Today's the last day of National School Choice Week, so happy National School Choice Week. Thanks to all of you who were at our events earlier and participated. We have one link on there that's just thank your legislators for school choice, right? It's always helpful for them to hear from parents and students and school leaders of what a difference the choice programs make, the students you serve. Many legislators have probably never been. They still, even though it's a fairly new program and we talk about it all the time, they really struggle with like the basics of how does a voucher work and what is an SGO and the tax credit. So anytime we get the chance to tell the story, we try to, but it's really helpful. Luke and I can go over to the State House and talk till we're blue in the face. But you walk in or a student walks in and it's much more impactful for them to hear the story directly from them. Personal stories matter. But so we made it easy. You can click on, at the top of the page, there's a Find Your Legislator button. You can go there. You can type in your home address. You can share it with your parents or your board. It'll tell them directly, your state rep and your state senator are these people. You can click this button and you can email them directly. Our Action Center allows us to put campaigns up. So the other one we have is Senate Bill 205. And right now we're essentially just targeting all the members of the Appropriations Committee and saying, please hear this bill. It's important to our students. And really this is going to the importance of kind of setting up the conversation in the budget year next year. How we'd love to see that funding follow the child year round. But again, we make it easy. There's you can click on which legislators you want it to go to. All 150 are there. For example, we have this one set up so it can go to all of them. The 205 one is set up just to go to the Senate Appropriations Committee members.
I switched. This is just 205
okay.
now.
So, and if you scroll down, you essentially just have to type in your name, email address, and we have a draft email in there. We would love it if you guys personalize it, right? I mean, legislators will get these. It's helpful for them to know, but the more you personalize it, the more they know that people are actually reading it and paying attention and care. And it's not just, I got this email, I'm going to forward it. It's still helpful that they hear from us because they definitely hear from the opponents, right? The teachers union has 60,000 people on an email list, and they blast it out. And I had a legislator tell me yesterday, I've got 1,300 emails from ISTA on one issue, right? And it's all one form letter. So these are helpful because they offset some of that. But the more we personalize them, a personalized one takes the place of 10 that are just same message, right? But we try to make it easy. You can also, so we have those that are set up. It's easy to just go on and click on a specific legislator, like your legislator, and type up any message you want, right? Hey, come visit our school. We'd love to have you at our school. And if you do have legislators at your school, please let us know. We'd love to be able to follow up with them and say, hey, I heard you were at Tabernacle the other day. How did it go? Is there anything we can help provide you with? So it's just helpful for them to hear that ongoing. They know we're watching. They know you all exist. The students you serve. There's so many false claims out there. It's amazing some of the questions we get or the things that we hear during testimony from our opponents of what private schools really are. So anything else? What questions do you guys have?
Questions?
What can we do to be helpful? What information can we share with you? Or I know Mary's in here, and I know she sends out regular updates with important information for you all. Oh, I guess one thing that I should bring up is we meet fairly regularly with the DOE's choice staff. I don't know, probably every 2 or 3 months or so, and try to work with them as just on various things. So they'll update us on, hey, we're getting ready to start our audit process or going out and doing our random visits, and here are issues we found, and so we try to be helpful on, are there messages that we can help communicate to our partner schools? Are there any issues? We spent a fair amount of time this late fall. They were suggesting that they try to pass language that would give them some teeth to kind of go after schools who, for whatever reason, there may be some issues with reporting, right? So there are all kinds of forms you have to report, and this is a problem I know. We're working with the DOE to kind of simplify all this, but to make sure that, we've got the enrollment and mobility, the student membership to make sure, and the endorsement forms. They wanted to essentially put language in the bill that said, if any school does not provide us with the information, that school is required to pay. Like, you can't charge a student for tuition. We're like, well, first of all, there are all types of constitutionality issues with that. But so they're really trying to find a way to go at schools and say, listen, we know issues pop up here and there, but we'd rather just work with schools. So just a reminder that when to make sure that if you're not already on the DOE's, like their regular weekly choice email list, that someone from your school needs to be on that. They put all the important reminders of deadlines coming up. They send it out every Friday. So make sure that someone from your school is on that and it's getting to the right person. And then, we try to take some of those important deadlines, and Mary will include those in her newsletter. So we want to be helpful. If you guys have any issues with the department's team not working well, let us know. We have a pretty good relationship with them, and we're just trying to make sure that everyone can get along and they don't try. Sometimes it's easier just to pick up the phone and call than say, hey, we didn't realize that the system wasn't working, you couldn't upload this form. So let us know how we can be helpful in that. Mary, is there anything you want to add? Okay.
Anyone on the phone have any thoughts or questions, concerns? If there's nothing else, we can hang around for a little bit and chit chat. But thank you all so much for spending some time with us on a Friday. Please feel free to contact me, Mary, Caitlin, Luke, anyone on the team after at any point throughout session or throughout the year when you have questions and concerns. We really appreciate working with you all.
We typically try to do one of these at the end of session as like a session wrap up. Yep. So we'll probably have more helpful information at that point because everything will be passed. But I also want you to know that if there are things you see that are like we want to know about it, right? So we can't, if we don't know about it, it's hard for us to advocate and help change the legislation. So keep us posted if anything at all is concerning. So.
Thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.